Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the last part of the first day of the conference. Thank you very much, Martin, and all the organizers for organizing this very much needed event. My name is Kladnik, and I will moderate this roundtable entitled "Cold War Changing Discourses and Practices on Peace." This roundtable was inspired by the book The Politics of Peace, written by Petra Göde, where she looks how during the Cold War the concept of peace became a political tool in the conflict between East and West. Peace was a questionable concept infused with multiple meanings in different geographical and political spheres. It carried political, religious, humanitarian, and gendered connotations. The rhetoric of peace both divided and united. It divided Eastern and Western powers as they offered competing visions of what peace meant and how to secure it in the geopolitical climate of the post-war years. It divided also peace activates as they struggled to develop strategies to challenge the Cold War consensus within their own countries. But it also united peace advocates across the Cold War divide as they sought to capitalize on the universal human desire for peaceful cooperation. From the late 1940s to the early 1970s, international peace advocacy moved from the intellectual, moral, and cultural margins of society to the centers of political power. Once peace advocates made peace political, their arguments had greater impact on the international political discourse. The gradual development of politics of peace at the grassroots level paved the way for a more pragmatic politics of peace among political leaders. The politicization of peace thus, so Göde, both obstructed and advanced the cause of peace. So this panel asked how a politics of and narratives on peace during the Cold War evolved in various political climates. Here to discuss these topics are two historians, Tina Filipović and Severyan Dyakonov, and let me introduce them a bit closer. Tina Filipović is a PhD candidate at the very last stage, waiting for the date of her defense at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Zagreb. She is also a research assistant at the History Department of Faculty of Humanities in Pula. She was part of the project Microstructures of Yugoslav Socialism, Croatia between 1970 and 1990, and a collective volume ensuing from this project was published last month or 2 months ago. Within this project, Tina investigated the position and the influence of partisan veterans organization in Croatia. She also works as a research associate at the European University Institute in Florence within the ERC project Social Politics in European Borderlands, through which she connects border issue with veterans' welfare in the northeastern Adriatic borderlands. As a member of the Center for Cultural and Historical Research of Socialism in Pula, she is actively engaged with broader topics related to the political and social history of socialism, memory, culture, veterans, and welfare. Thank you, Tina, for coming. Then Severyan Dyakonov completed his PhD project at the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva in Switzerland. After his fellowship at the Harvard University, he's currently a postdoctoral researcher at the New York University, working on his project entitled Cold War in Neutral Spaces of International Organizations, the Soviet Red Cross and the International League of the Red Cross in the 1950s to 1980s. He works on the history of the Cold War, the International League of Red Cross organization, especially the Soviet Red Cross, and humanitarian aid in the Global South. His book project, Soviet Public Diplomacy in India, from 1959 to 65, is at a review stage at the Cornell University Press. Yeah. Thank you, Severyan. So thank you again both for coming. In the program, you can see that there should be 2 more discussants, but unfortunately, the viruses are not just in Ljubljana, but also in Glasgow and Graz. So Anna Graf-Steiner and Aidan Rechford were unfortunately not able to come to Ljubljana. The plan for this roundtable is to have 2 rounds of discussions, after which the floor will be open for a general debate. And I would like to start, Tina, with you, if you could focus on the veteran organization, especially their organization and activities on the local level in socialist Yugoslavia. The veteran organization was one of the socio-political organizations with a great deal of political power, direct and indirect, but it also cooperated with veteran organizations abroad. So please tell us more about these cooperations in relation to peace.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for the invitation, and hello to everyone who are still standing alive and in a good mood, hopefully. Yeah, as defined by the experts in the field on veterans and veterans internationalism and Cold War politics, veterans rarely were decisive historical actors, but they were involved in, they became involved in all the major historical processes that shaped the world after 1945. And the veterans represented a considerable group of civil actors loaded with traumatic experiences of war, defeat, occupation, collaboration, and resistance that eventually made them forerunners in bonding across the Iron Curtain. One of the characteristics of the post-war period was that former combatants, even former enemies, assumed an important role in the process of international reconciliation from the early 1950s on. For veterans and various war participants and war victims, the construction of the culture of peace had to go through the process of peacemaking and reconciliation. However, reconciliation in the Cold War was very much affected by the bipolar political order, by the different notions on social justice, and by the legacy of long-standing historical disputes that contaminated too many bilateral relationships. So the role of the international veterans organizations in overcoming these divisions and fostering the reconciliation by the mechanisms of reapproachment was enormous. This was not only evident in terms of German-Franco ties with the veterans' families and youth exchanges, for example, and similar programs, but also was evident in the partnerships between the towns and cities, as well as in the international solidarity initiatives like donation campaigns for foreign war veterans in Europe in the late 1950s and similar campaigns during the late 50s. Ideals of comradeship and honor that will transcend the national boundaries were main categories of an ex-soldier's self-determination, self-description that helped in the reconciliation process, which was very much connected with the different ideas of a unified world and, or at least a unified Europe if we speak about Western European outlooks, for example. The goal was to create a multinational community of interest based on a transnational concept of comradeship, even by overcoming the division between the war victors and the vanquished. But post-war veterans internationalism was not without limits, and the beginnings were quite tough for Yugoslav veterans. The first international organization in whose work Yugoslav veterans participated, the International Federation of Former Political Prisoners and Partisans, established already in 1947, became soon shaken by the Cominform crisis. In 1950, this organization suddenly expelled Yugoslav partisan organization, Subnor's representatives from the membership, which will determine the further course of Yugoslav veterans' internationalism. Subnor will soon turn their chances to the second main international organization and even participate in its emergence, in the emergence of the World Veterans Federation. So Yugoslavia thus became the only country from the socialist bloc to join the federation, the World's Veteran Federation. And the first General Assembly of this federation was held in Belgrade in November 1951 with a speech given by Tito. So this World Veterans Federation had a clearly Western character, American political and financial supremacy, and an outspoken anti-communist outlook. So even though some main international veterans organizations at that time had a pro-Western and anti-communist outlook, especially in Western Europe, Yugoslavia managed to develop a cooperation with both sides of the bloc. So Subnor stayed as a member observer in the first organization I was mentioning that was expelled from. And the its veterans delegates from Subnor, as the only delegates coming from a communist country, even participated as representatives at the Third Congress of the Association of Returnees, Prisoners of War and Missing Persons of Germany in Köln in 1959. After Tito-Stalin split, especially after the emergence of the non-aligned movement, Yugoslav veterans gained greater autonomy and freedom to create new transnational networks and to expand channels for their international activity. This cooperation was extremely important and irreplaceable window to the world that Tito's partisans were very good at using. Eventually, with the period of detente in East-West relations, rivalry between main veterans international organizations began to subside, and by the late 1970s, representatives of the Big Four veterans organizations met a few times and agreed on the need to cooperate towards disarmament, security, and peace in Europe. Needless to say, Subnor's ideal of mitigating the differences and political binary was finally came to life at the joint veterans conferences maintained in the background of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe in Helsinki. So international veterans cooperation helped speed up the process of reconciliation and peace building. And at the same time, veterans peace building initiatives assisted in faster reintegration of veterans into civil society. And that was also very important on the local level, where with the travelings abroad, veterans are going abroad like ordinary people are getting chance to visit countries that were really very hard to visit in normal conditions. But some funds from the municipality were really important for the people to go in the process of reconciliation, in the process of healing, to go outside the borders, to meet with former comrades, to make networks. And usually these networks from the local level, for example, coming from the letters they were writing to each other, are slowly turned into friendships, and also into veterans cooperation on the institutional level. So at the dense list of tasks and obligations, partisan veterans proclaimed peace building as one of its main assignments. Subnor's international cooperation, like its regular activity, of course, followed the patterns of the official policy of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia. And most of the ideas on international cooperation were grounded in the non-interference policy, in the peaceful coexistence, disarmament programs, balanced global socio-economic development, and finally in Yugoslav visions of non-alignment and self-managed socialism as the best solution for overcoming bloc divisions in a deeply divided world. That did not preclude international veterans cooperation from creating a new space for Yugoslav promotion of the domestic version of socialism and development, promotion of the history of the people's liberation struggle and specific virtues of a Yugoslav partisan hero, and popularization of Yugoslav war memory culture in a new context. Veterans collaboration was also useful in suppressing enemy emigrant activities abroad, or at least in opposing the anti-Yugoslav propaganda. One of the side effects of the cooperation was also flourishing of memorial tourism in Yugoslavia and the encouragement of the town twinning, especially between Croatian and Italian towns in the wider borderland region. So the paths of making relationships, of making cooperation were usually with the former comrades from foreign, mainly neighboring countries, who also fought under the command of the Yugoslav People's Army. They collaborated with the ideologically similar veterans organizations like Polish Veterans Union. The cooperation was established with the representatives of the resistance movement and former participants of the armies of the anti-fascist coalition, with the veterans organizations from Algeria, Egypt, Ethiopia, Mali, India, with the non-aligned countries and their veterans organizations. And of course, the relationship between the different representatives of the resistance movement, also from Western Europe. Relationships that developed despite the distance, different political regimes, language barriers, and different societies was extraordinary. But one such relationship became truly interesting and special. It outgrown the frames of exclusively veterans cooperation. It was established between the prisoners of war and veterans from the resistance movement, along with the local civilians immediately after the liberation. It inspired the creation of the friendship societies in both countries and produced rich cultural and intellectual material, as well as numerous social bonding practices. Cooperation of Yugoslav former prisoners of war that survived internment and forced labor in occupied Norway during the Second World War was a showcase example of veterans and war victims' peace-building initiative grounded in the common memory of wartime pain and resistance and transnational solidarity. So the story, just to bring it short, more than 4,000 prisoners from Yugoslavia, mostly from Serbia, were deported by German authorities to Norway, where they were supposed to work as slave labor. So in this misery, Norwegian local people and resistance fighters demonstrated tremendous empathy and camaraderie, assisting inmates to either survive or flee. They organized hidden escape points, fed the prisoners secretly along the working route, delivered food, medicine, cigarettes, and accessories to the prisoners, smuggling newspapers and information from the front lines to the camps, etc. Between Germany's capitulation and the repatriation of the internees in August 1945, approximately 1,500 surviving Yugoslav internees formed numerous contacts and friendships with Norwegians, who supplied them with clothing, food, and necessities, while the Norwegian government organized numerous celebrations, rallies, plays, sports matches, and concerts. Several meetings of Yugoslav internees and Norwegian activists were held prior to the departure, with the goal of establishing the Norwegian Yugoslav Society, which was finally founded in July 1945 as a friendship society for cultural and scientific development, as well as the organization of student and sport exchanges. The activity of the society fell silent for a while, only to be reactivated in the mid-60s, when also the Yugoslav-Norwegian Friendship Society was founded. The members were primarily former Yugoslav internees and their families, who were often also the members of Subnor. Traditional celebrations, gatherings, and rich cultural and artistic programs took place in Gornji Milanovac in Serbia, in the so-called the House of Friendship, next to the monument to the martyred Yugoslav internees in Norway. The memory of wartime solidarity in Norway, like a clearly human positive experience, was turned into ground for long-term friendship between the two countries, with the idea of engaging different people, masses and younger generations especially, in the preservation of such a relationship. The partisan marches were a prime illustration of this multi-phased process, which is why they were called the new lanes of Yugoslav-Norwegian friendship. They were arranged yearly by both societies, Yugoslav-Norwegian, Norwegian-Yugoslav, as a way for young people to connect with former internees so that the ideas of strong mutual friendship might go on. The Norwegian Partisan March began in 1978 in Brekstad in memory of the path that escaping Yugoslav internees had to walk from the prison camp Austria to the so-called partisan cabin, built by Norwegians to aid prisoners survive their escape. Members of both societies, former internees, young athletes, and some local inhabitants generally participated in this 40 kilometers long commemorative partisan march route. Following a few visits to the Norwegian partisan march, students and lecturers from the Faculty of Kinesiology in Zagreb planned the Yugoslav version of the march with the assistance of a journalist and Norway's vice consul in Yugoslavia, Željko Takac. Partisan Brotherhood March began in 1981 at Samobor and was held every year in honor of the Fighters' Day on July 4th. The next key aspect of Yugoslav-Norwegian and Subnor international cooperation was writing and publishing. Several books and works about Yugoslav internees in Norway were published. A film called Blood Vein, The Blood Road was co-produced with the Norwegians in the middle of the 50s. 2 memorials to fallen Yugoslav camp prisoners were erected in Gornji Milanovac and Oslo, and an exhibition called People's Liberation Struggle in Yugoslavia and the Norwegian Resistance Movement was shown in both countries. The society had its radio show on the niche radio named Jugovisions, Jugovežani, and many of the Yugoslav folklore groups performed across Norway. Besides mutual student exchanges and caravans of friendship in which young people from Yugoslavia could travel across Norway, Norwegians participated in youth work actions in Yugoslavia. Their school children were regular guests at the children manifestation Joy of Europe in Belgrade. The activity of the Yugoslav Norwegian Society made an impact on initiating the town twinning process with Norwegian cities and helped to expand the tourism opportunities. So, Yugoslav Norwegian Society represents an extraordinary success of Subnor's international cooperation because the cooperation happened to be constant and encompassing despite the long distance, language barriers, the differences in political and social state systems. The society remained the only case in Subnor's international cooperation in which other social subjects like ambassadors, culture workers and artists, athletes, professors and ordinary citizens took the initiative in keeping the memory of the wartime days alive in this matter. It is significant that the first version of this friendship society, as well as the Partisan Friendship March, appeared in Norway, not in Yugoslavia, and the scope of the cooperation was really fascinating. It can be interpreted as an example of the successful transformation of the traumatic war memory and experiences into a strong mutual friendship bound between the countries that were determined to cherish the idea of solidarity, anti-fascism, and internationalism as the greatest human values. So this is the example of just one specific case of Subnor's International Veterans Cooperation, which was also, of course, active at the local level with the branches of with the cooperation of Subnor with the branches of Yugoslav Norwegian Society, for example, with town twinning directly towns from which the persons, the ex prisoners were coming from. So in all the towns where there was a society or group of people who were imprisoned in Norway, was established some kind of connection with the Norwegian, with the Yugoslav Norwegian Friendship Society, and also directly with the Norwegian Yugoslav Society. So it's really it was always highlighted as a special case of this international cooperation. Is like it overgrown the regular, the typical activities, the typical forms, also in the culture production, in the gatherings, in the sport activities, in the connecting with the younger generations, and also it was showcased like a very successful story of making friendships on a traumatic war memory and experience.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tina, for this. And now from veteran organization to the Red Cross organization. Severian, your research focused on the Red Cross organization during the Cold War. So please tell us more about the discussions regarding peace between Eastern and Western Bloc countries and in non-alignment countries within the Red Cross organization.
Thank you very much. So I work on this project for more than a year, and I really didn't think to focus much on this idea of peace and how it was promoted. But once I had a question from the public that we know that Soviet Union was so much involved in the promotion of peace and talking about peace, and they asked me how the Red Cross was involved in it. And then I was invited here, and I started to think, oh, maybe I could conceptualize it differently. Just a little story. This is an ICRC poster from 1969, and I think they made reference to the Vietnam War. And I posted it on Twitter, and then the algorithm somehow hid it, so people didn't really see it, because I think the algorithm sees some violence in that, so you can't really, you know, post everything you want to. So we'll start from the organization of the Red Cross movement. It's very important to understand how Soviet Union got involved in it. So the idea is that the Soviet Union became part of the main governing bodies of the International Red Cross movement that is based in Geneva by 1950s. And in the Soviet Union, they were representing the Red Cross as kind of left-leaning progressive force, and the Soviet Union is heading this organization and the movement. So it's kind of not something foreign, but it's something from the Soviet Union as well. So this is the scheme, and actually it's not that easy to understand, and I don't quite understand it yet. The first organization is Swiss, the ICRC, that was established in 1863. So the idea was that European countries are in war, and Switzerland is always neutral, so they can come in and be a mediator between countries. And then rapidly, the major powers, they established their own Red Cross societies, national societies, and in Russian Empire, they established in 1867, and then in America in 1885, and in other countries. So there was not so much of international cooperation within the Red Cross movement before the First World War. And after the First World War, the Americans actually, they were very much upset and dissatisfied with ICRC, and they had this idea with this Wilsonian internationalism movement that there should be another body coordinating national societies, and they established the League of the Red Cross Societies in 1919. That would become kind of a real Red Cross that would represent the world. And throughout the interwar years, the organization was it was dominated by Swiss or American citizens that were working in it, as ICRC is exclusively for Swiss citizens because they're neutral and they could be mediator. So after the revolution, there was a Soviet Red Cross established, and in 1921, ICRC recognized the Soviet Red Cross that eventually joined the League in 1934. That was the idea of Stalin to collaborate with Western powers when Nazis took power in Germany. But still, Soviet Union was not that internationally active at that point. Things changed after the Second World War. In 1946, the Soviet Union was elected in the Board of Governors of the League of the Red Cross. And what is more important, in 1952, it was elected in the Standing Commission that is in the very center. It's the commission that coordinates relations between national societies, the ICRC, and when something happens and people send requests or something to the League. So it's the Standing Commission that's really is there to be the first one to work with the new issue. So from the 52, Soviet Union was kind of one of the governing bodies of the whole international Red Cross movement. So I wanted to talk about what was the movement itself. The League actually was probably the most universal organization, the most international organization in the world. It had both Germany's inside of the League. It had first South Korea in '54, and then in a year they accepted the North Korea. So they were kind of showing that they are representing the whole world. And that the time of the decolonization, and I think for the Soviet Union it was important to join international organizations that were based in Geneva and New York and Paris, like UNESCO, ILO, WHO, because they saw the world was changing. There would be more countries that the world is decolonizing, and they have like a new stage where they can influence countries that would probably lean to the left because they are poor countries. So their idea was that if you believe in democracy, the most of the world is kind of left-leaning. There is the Eastern Bloc, there's China, there are communists, and there is the decolonizing world who are poor and who are anti-imperialist, anti-Western kind of countries. So the Cold War is kind of, we are kind of winning and leading the way, and we are the progressive force of history or something. So I'll go, yeah. So the Soviet Union was always trying to promote, to make initiatives at all congresses and conferences of the Red Cross. They are saying that these difficult times when mankind may be plunged into a nuclear holocaust, the place of the Red Cross as a humanitarian organization is among those who are working for peace, friendship, and cooperation among nations. And like at every stage, they are trying to make a new resolution and to represent that they were the first to talk about it. Like the first one in Toronto, they are making a resolution about disarmament. Then later in 57, they adopted a resolution called the Red Cross as a factor of world peace. And then it's continuing in 63 also and later on. I just don't want to show all of it. This one story is a bit blurred, but a bit topical for today. When in 1973, Red Cross conference in Tehran, the Soviet Red Cross delegation actively supported a resolution adopted on the initiative of the delegation from the Arab countries, which denounced the violations by Israel in the temporary occupied Arab lands of the 1949 Geneva Convention on protection of the civilian population in wartime. And when you look at the documents of the League, the Western countries, those who are from Swedish Red Cross in the governing body, they always talk about the Eastern Bloc are politicizing the movement. We want to make the movement like a humanitarian, purely humanitarian organization. It should be apolitical, but for the Eastern Bloc, nothing could be neutral. If you're talking about neutral, it's kind of prolonging the status quo and making this hierarchy of the Western powers who are always more rich and more developed, and we are kind of lagging behind, and nothing can be apolitical, and this idea of peace is active, and it can be, you can't say that humanitarianism is completely neutral. And they had this idea that humanitarianism and socialism are kind of equal, and they were representing the Red Cross movement from the very beginning as something left-leaning and progressive, even in the 19th century. When the Soviets, they had celebrations of their Red Cross, they didn't talk about the Soviet Red Cross that was established in 1918 after the revolution. They were saying that the Red Cross ideals, the Red Cross in our country exists from 1867, as the Imperial Red Cross is also kind of us, and people who are in the Western Red Cross societies, they are also more kind of friendly to left-leaning ideas, and kind of we have hopes to integrate them into this world peace movement. What was the Soviet Red Cross inside of the Soviet Union? It became like overinflated organization where most of Soviet citizens were part of it, were members of the Red Cross. Like already in 1930s, there were like 20 million members. There is an idea that there was like, the Red Cross tried to make these education campaigns about sanitary, about hygiene, about this first aid to prepare for war. Then, okay, after Second World War, there was the same, but by 1960, there were 50 million members, then in the 70s, even more, and in the beginning of 80s, there were 120 million members in the Soviet Union, in a country of 270 million, so it kind of, everyone was nominally part of it, but I think they wanted to make this kind of world sort of citizenship to show that there is this world movement. There are people, members of the Red Cross, not only in the Soviet Union, but there are people in India, in the United States, and all of them sort of share the same values. Of course, it wasn't the case, and there were always these debates during the conferences, and the Western countries, they try to show, they were always accusing the Soviet part of politicizing the movement and the Red Cross, and for Soviet Union, they were constantly trying to do this rhetoric about peace. Yeah, and then when we talk about what were their actual programs about peace, they were saying that their humanitarian aid, this is for peace, this is our peace efforts. The Soviet Union had like more than 100 of operations around the world. By 1970s, there's the map, and most of the operations are in the decolonized world in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And the Soviet Union had the Soviet Red Cross had permanent hospitals in the non-aligned countries in Algeria, Ethiopia, Iran, Afghanistan in the 60s, India, and Cambodia. The first Red Cross hospitals were in North Korea and in China. So maybe I'll go. How then it was reflected in the central organizations of the Red Cross in Geneva, and I saw this article of Jean Pictet, who was like one of the leading people in the Red Cross movement, vice president of the ICRC, who was one of the writers of the Geneva Conventions in 1949, and he here kind of admits that the Red Cross movement is organization for peace, and in the article he mentions all of these initiatives of the Red Cross movement about peace, but he doesn't make credit for the Soviet Union. But I think it was actually important for the Soviet Union not to be mentioned, but to represent that it's not us who are making these initiatives, but it's the whole Red Cross movement that are doing them. There is an interesting topic about the Soviet influence inside of the Red Cross movement, how they try to popularize their ideology. And in 1965, the Bulgarian Red Cross established a film festival for Red Cross films that were on disaster relief and for about healthcare issues. There were feature films, and the League actually recognized it, and it became the official film festival of the whole Red Cross movement. And I'm working in it, looking that it tried to keep this international character. It was always showing film from the West, but with always this kind of progressive ideals in these films. I saw the British feature films about people that having troubles with getting health care. In the United States, the same. And they always try to get films from the global south, but these countries, they just didn't produce enough materials to be there. So mostly there were films from the West and from Eastern Bloc. The International Federation of the Red Cross has a YouTube channel, and some of the films are available there, and you can check them there. So, yeah, that's part would be about what's going on today. So I think I could stop here, but it's just I was wondering about the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, when they were talking about peace in 1950s and 1960s, that these people are really suffered in the Second World War, and the most casualties happened in that part. And for them, I think, like for everyone, it was kind of more closer than I think for many Americans, that they didn't see that, or only people who were in the military during the Second World War. And just to mention that in the 50s, the Red Cross movement had a lot more importance, and the people who were engaged there, For example, the head of the American Red Cross in late 50s, he was the American general who previously served as the chief of staff of the the NATO forces in Europe. The Soviet Red Cross was headed by Mitirov, who was Minister of the Healthcare of the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And the British Red Cross was also headed by a very important person who was part of the British establishment, Countess Limerick. But after the Cold War, it's not the same level of, hierarchy, and it's not the same importance. And it reflects in many other organizations. I'm working on the CARE International. It was American humanitarian organization that was active globally. It was present in Eastern Bloc, in Poland, in Yugoslavia, in South Korea, in India. They had a huge program for providing food for schools in India. And Americans, when we talk about to people who are kind of studied in schools in the 1970s, they remember people coming from CARE to schools talking about this organization, that asking to buy some stamps and send some fees to them, that they kind of, with buying a stamp, you are helping someone somewhere far away in Africa, and they're making this connection. And now the CARE International does exist, but it's just a small NGO, and so there was a big thing about internationalism in the Cold War that it's not longer surviving. Yeah.
Thank you, Severyan. Before we open the floor for questions and comments, I would like to ask you if you could tell us more about what happened to the veteran organization in Croatia and to the Red Cross in the post-Cold War period, in post-socialist Croatia, and what happened to the Soviet Red Cross in the post-Soviet period, but also what happened to the International Red Cross. Maybe Tina.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Anna. Subnor ceased to exist after the split of Yugoslavia, but it turned into another organization, the Association of Anti-Fascist Fighters and Anti-Fascists of Croatia. It changed its name in 1992, and of course it became a Republican, a strictly Croatian organization of anti-fascists. And it became to deploy the younger members in the organization, which was a big problem for Subnor, for example, in the terms of long-standing revolutionary traditions, which you can really transmit to the younger generations. So, the organization today doesn't have such a good reputation, maybe, in a Croatian society, as I can say like that. I mean, in a public discourse, because the public discourse is really contaminated with some other politically more important stuff, like political divisions, which are coming from the homeland war, and the perception of homeland war as and the values of patriotism as a strictly and the only one values or tradition which is going to make Croatian people more binded, more coherative, more like a more stronger nation. And the heritage, the legacy of the anti-fascists, the anti-fascism in Croatia is really very purposely forgotten in the public speech. But what is interesting is that both veterans from the homeland war and veterans and the members of the anti-fascist organization can work together, of course, can go together on the commemorations, war commemorations. In Istria, this is the case. They also very much cooperate with the NGOs, which is also one good thing from the 1990s on, that we have plenty of NGOs and the growing civil society, which is engaging with helping veterans to, especially veterans from the homeland war, to go through the process of healing and reconciliation. And also they are very much engaged in the various projects from the schools, along with the peace activists. They also, between themselves, I'm now speaking about the associations of veterans from the homeland war, they are between themselves very fragile, very separated. There are many various types of the associations between themselves, but there are two very interesting homeland war associations which are embracing the anti-fascist tradition. One is from Split. It's called Vedra. It's like veterans, and who are saying that the anti-fascism is a value which was also active during the Second World War and during the Homeland War. I mean, anti-fascism is a tradition which we, as ex-combatants, need to cherish, and we need to look at the war as a fascist danger, as something which we should oppose. And they have plenty of interesting actions in Split, for example. Write down on the monument the date of the liberation of Split, because this date is suddenly forgotten on the on the monument. Is not written there. All the important dates from the history of Split are there, but not the day of the liberation of the town. So, and they are very much collaborate with the cultural workers, with the actors, with the cultural scene, with the artists, and etc. And they are also well. They were the only association who was standing along with on the appeal to ban the Ustaša insignias in the Croatian public place, to ban the pozdrav, the za dom spremni, the unfortunately still used sentence during the commemorations. For example, we had commemoration in Vukovar last weekend, so it's still very active in the Croatian discourse, and the level of condemnation of that kind of koketiziranje, that kind of engagement with the history of the Ustaša movement, and the crossing the line between what is acceptable and what we need to condemn is really weak. Like moderation itself is perceived as a weakness in the society. It's always like you have to have some strong stances, and it should be black or white, or I know it's just that type of patriotism, which is really related and grounded on the historical revisionism and on the engaging with the homeland war, and nothing between or nothing before that happened in Croatia history, is really a problem which few organizations of homeland war veterans are also trying to oppose, and on some kind they are trying to be proactive in the society. Another veteran organization called VIDRA, Veterani društvena akcija, Veterans and Social Action, they're also trying to show, to expose in the media to the public all the corruption and crimes, financial crimes, or the political crimes committed at the state level, especially with the forests in Croatia. They are trying to fight for veterans, but for all society to have a much clearer picture of what is going on in these networks of political kinship and relationships, and they are trying to truly make a better society for veterans and for the rest of the society. And I think that this legacy from the socialist period is just making a change in the society, to make a better society, is something that is really important for veterans, because the process is on both sides. This helps veterans to reintegrate better, more directly into the civil society, and also helps them to go through the process of healing, which is very important, because veterans, and along with their families, with their children, are really, veterans can be potentially influential social group and politically influential group in a society, and it's just a circle that you need to heal the whole circle, the whole communication between society, veterans, perceptions of war memory, younger generations, and it's clearly something that in Croatia is not going on well, despite all the shots taking, all the chances that they are, all the efforts. Few veterans organizations and NGOs are trying to do and trying to change.
Thank you, Severyan.
There is a little surprise actually about what's happening now. So after 1991, former Soviet Union, Russia, they became recipient of humanitarian aid, and I saw documents of the League making this agreement with the new Russian Red Cross, how they sent aid to Russian hospitals. Like in the 50s, Soviet Union was building pediatric hospitals abroad, and the first aid for the Soviet Union was for pediatric hospitals in Russia, actually. So it completely disintegrated, and now membership for the Russian Red Cross is really low. But what happened recently, because of the Ukrainian war, there was another conference of the International Red Cross, and they elected the governing body in June 2022, last year, after the Ukrainian war started, and they elected Russia there. So it's again in the board of governors of the League of the Federation of the Red Cross. How it's done is that the member Red Cross societies, they secretly vote. Every part of the world should be represented, and Russia representing Europe here. So I don't know what was the motivation of them to vote, but can speculate that they wanted to have someone from Europe, but not from this Western Europe part. And then the Ukrainian crisis also was really seen badly in the global South, because they were seeing that when there is white Christian refugees coming with big numbers to Europe, they're welcome. But if there is a big civil war in Egypt, say, and there are like 5 million Egyptians coming to Europe, would it be the same level of acceptance? And the answer is probably no. So I think they are voting something, their grievances in this way, and accepting Russia to be part of the governing body of the League again. Yeah. Yeah, about no, I can't show it from here, so it's just,
Okay, thank you very much. How are we doing with time? Oh, very good. So please, the floor is open for questions, for comments. Do we need the microphone?
Yeah, okay. If you could talk a little bit more in the same direction about the the difference in the way the Red Cross was attached to peace, to a forward movement, in relation to how maybe today humanitarian organizations are attached to war, right? If there's a difference that you see in a structural difference or a conjunctural difference or a political difference.
I think it would be different perception for kind of early Cold War and later. And what the Red Cross did, I think, that it was kind of one of the first humanitarian organizations, and they set up some standards and values that later NGOs, they kind of took them and developed in something else. But I think it's important to get to the root of all this NGO humanitarianism, these voluntary organizations, and to understand where these values were developed. And like there is an idea that initially the Red Cross in the 19th century, it was for war. It was just for war, just during the war. That's why we need this organization to cure the wounded and then get them back to the fields and fight more. So it was like in the idea of defense, yes. But then later the Red Cross became more also for the peacetime as a relief organization for disaster relief, yes.
Yeah, in spite of probably different modalities during the Cold War that comprised many decades, you said at the end something very important, and that certain modalities of international humanitarianism are not anymore possible after the end of the Cold War. And I think that's very important. Also, we need to bear in mind that the logic of humanitarianism radically changed, more or less, during the Yugoslav crisis, and that these were actually the places when it changed, when we, instead of international humanitarianism, understood either as immediate aid to people in war, to all these other than natural catastrophes, it simply changed to something which is called humanitarian intervention. So the agents became very different. Then the NGOs came, but they are part of the neoliberal economy. They simply need to do things following the logic, which is not a logic of international humanitarianism, simply because they cannot afford it. They need funds, they depend on funds. And there are many testimonies and many evidence how very different this approach is from the war in Bosnia, Kosovo, and so on. And of course, later in other places. But again, I think what is really important here is the agency of collectivity and the agency of states as autonomous, legitimate actors in humanitarianism. That agency is almost, really not possible anymore. And looking to the list you were showing, and also after the discussion we had today about the fact that non-aligned movement still exists, actually. It's not that it disappeared. It's still there. But actually, I think it's very important also question to ask, what effective and actual capacities this frames once filled with the strong ideas of collective internationalism, with what they are filled today. They are kind of storage for something else, part of course of global politics, but in a very different way than it used to be. And I mean, it's not a question for you, but I'm interested in how you see the Red Cross today, in the sense of not only who has which interest, but what it can really do at the first place.
Well, they do relief aid now, and would be interesting just to see, for example, how much, just in volume, how many items they sent here and there, like and compare it to 1970 now, how does it look? I don't know, I didn't look at it. For sure, Russia is not doing much at all, and I'm not sure about the Chinese Red Crosses being active that much. And there is a big problem about ICRC as well, because there is a big problem with Swiss identity, as it used to be a neutral country bordering different countries around, but in the last 20 years it became surrounded by one unified international body of the European Union, and Switzerland is no longer that neutral country, and the ICRC as a Swiss organization is losing this status that it used to have. And when the Ukrainian crisis actually happened, how they saw it in Russia, that Switzerland is inside of this list of countries that supported sanctions, and ICRC is part of Switzerland, so they cannot be this neutral mediator anymore. But the president, she came in winter to Moscow to negotiate, and she's trying to have another meeting with the Russian leadership this year. And it depends on how Russia, I guess, would see them. So there is a big erosion of the Red Cross movement in general. But what I saw with the Gaza crisis now, they are quite vocal and quite present and quite critical. Yes.
Any more questions or comments? Oh yeah, okay.
The two, but for all the three of you, because I know, Anna, your work, and I think we had quite some discussions today about possibilities and possibilities to genuinely speak, especially about certain forms of interaction, collaboration, solidarity, aid, and so on, peace that existed in the past and that are not so easily imaginable today. And like in many venues, many conferences, I heard several papers speaking about international solidarity, but also in that context of war veterans, Yugoslav war veterans, where very often there is a tendency to subject this history to categories that are more familiar to us today, from the vantage point from which we live, experience the world, and are able to think politics. So very often, like speaking about hospitals built either by the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia in Algeria or Cuba, immediately we come to the discourse of competition, who had more interest, and the interest is kind of a very important word here. Then we come to the discourse about export of like the model, to like this paternalist model, again some interest there when it comes to the engagement of subnor members in newly liberated post-colonial societies. And then when we speak about solidarity, generally voluntarism, there is always this kind of discourse of like it cannot be genuine. There was some interest in that, either in individual interest, like people believed they will have better chances if they go to these voluntary labor actions. So very often it's actually this kind of liberal, neoliberal prism, economic prism through which we speak, or people tend to speak about these very specific experiences and practices of solidarity internationally or inside certain societies. And my question is, do you encounter these challenges? And how you actually tackle with them? Can we really disentangle that history from our own position, which is totally outside the constellation of possibilities that existed during the Cold War? Although at that moment we thought this is a very like the world which is on the verge of tragedy, so polarized, but it seems that non-polarized, unified world is much worse place than the Cold War, which is another kind of thing to think about.
I will be really short. Thank you, Tanya, for putting this question up. Sometimes it's really striking this level of motivation, of will to surrender yourself into solidarity without questioning what the interest is in what interest you have in doing this. For example, in the case of exporting the revolutionary Yugoslav revolutionary tradition, I don't like that term exporting because, well, they also by themselves were speaking about that in terms of, well, it's good to have the promotion of the values we cherish, promotion of the tradition. We want to build the world on that tradition. We want everybody to know that what are the positive effects and the positive legacies of the People's Liberation War, but not in the terms we are going to put our traditions there in the Algeria, for example. Is just let's find some similarities. Let's show them our example because they are asking us to show them our examples. They are asking for help. They are asking for support. They are asking for ideas. They are considering our story successful, so they need to lean on some positive examples. When speaking about international cooperation as a tool for eliminating harmful propaganda, they also talked about that. It's just an interest that Subnor was saying in his documents, that this is also important. This is a way we are fighting against the harmful propaganda, immigrant actions, and stuff like that, which was a threat. But they were considering that it's a constant threat. We need to make more books in foreign languages about our society, our history of the People's Liberation War. Sometimes it's really striking that how that level of organization of ordinary people, of ordinary veterans who are not, who are maybe from the countryside, which are standing on the railway station waiting for some foreign guests to come, and then they don't know nothing about French language, or they don't know how they look like, but they are standing in hours for waiting them to became the hosts to show the hospitality of Yugoslav Veterans Association, of Yugoslav society, which they were considered very important for the promotion of Yugoslav version of socialism, of Yugoslav society. I mean, they really they really highlighted these values in the communication with the others. I think that they were really focused on themselves more than on others or exporting their values to others. They were just considered with making this cooperation more realistic to masses, to the more veterans, not just to the delegates, which was especially actual on the beginning. Just delegates were traveling, but they wanted to give this opportunity to more and more veterans to really make contacts with a lot of places, a lot of veterans organizations they've established collaboration with. So that's my point of view and my impression from the documents, from the archives, and the discussions they were having about these important tasks of international veterans cooperation.
I just remembered this conference at Graz about voluntarism and practice of voluntarism in the Eastern Bloc. And when trying to revive this voluntarism, there is this fear, as if to try to extract labor from people within capitalist economy, and how to do it without breaking the system. It's just not, I don't see it's realistic. And I think in this Cold War context, this competition, it was not just competition between countries, but competition between the bigger structures, bigger systems of governance, and different versions of modernity. Yeah. That many people benefited in India and in the decolonized world.
Thanks all for these really interesting talks. I was wondering, Tina, whether you could say a bit more about how Subnor went about the fact that their membership was growing old and the world around them was changing, Yugoslavia was changing, and geopolitically as well, and also what happened to all the international cooperation after 91, and when it became an association of anti-fascist fighters. So after the regime change, and also the radical context change.
Thank you, Martin, for the question. I have to admit, this is not a topic which I was studying in the past few years, because international veterans cooperation was just a smaller part of my dissertation. So, and I don't know exactly what happened with the scope of the cooperation in nowadays Croatia, or nowadays anti-fascist organization, but I assume that the scope is not even close to the one in the socialist period. And I know that the World's Veterans Federation is still the largest, the most prominent international veterans organization, and that a lot of strange veterans organizations are also there, and that meetings are held really regularly, but I don't see this as really important as it was for today's veterans cooperation, because Subnor during its existence really had to adapt on various changes in the society, not only in Yugoslav society, but global society. So they did a lot of changes. They tried to adapt to the notion of we are getting old and we will not exist. It's like they are considered themselves an organization for a mission to transmit the values, to transmit the memory of the common memory of the people's liberation struggle, like a task that is successfully being transmitted. Like they are having debates in the late 80s. They still don't want to rejuvenate its membership because they are this type of organization. Of course, they are a socio-political organization. It's dangerous for operation of organization to make such a turn, to make such a change. So yeah, this is something which lagged them behind in the process of changing, in the society changing, in the process of liberalization, democratic changes, of course. But I think that in this type of international cooperation, that they were really adapting very well, in maybe more than they were adapting in their everyday politics and their home domestic environment. They were ready to talk with the former enemies, but of course inside the International Veterans Organization, this was a very delicate question. And it's also one of characteristics of the Cold War reapproachment or reconciliation process, and it's really interesting topic to be further researched in terms of Subnor, for example, which is always somewhere at the forefront, at the top of the activities in the International Veterans Organization. And it's really interesting case, of course, being somewhere between the two blocks, of course. But for today's veterans organization, this status is lost. This status is not even comparable to the one. And I think that they have a lot of work to do, firstly, inside their own borders. And but they need to look at the global scale of veterans internationalism, of course. But as I was saying, first do the job inside their own ranks, with their own neighbors, with their own wounds, and of course, after that, they should be ready to participate in the world veterans movement.
Okay. If there are no more questions, I don't think that anyone will mind if we conclude after this long day a few minutes earlier. I thank you, Tina and Severyan, for your presentations, and everyone for a great debate. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.